Cool. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unofficial Game Pass podcast. This episode, we are going to be talking spoilers about about Batman Arkham Knight. So, if you haven't played the game, switch off now. Go play it. If you want a quick TLDR on what our opinions were on it, we think it's a very good game, and we think you should go and check it out on Game Pass. But if you'd like to hear more of our in-depth thoughts on that, we have a link to our spoiler-free review down below. With that being said, you have been warned. So we'll get into I think where every spoiler episode seems to be, the existence of every spoiler episode seems to be down to narrative reasons. So I want to first of all, we'll just correct one thing that we mentioned in the last episode, which was that we thought that Gotham Knights was going to be set in the universe, in the Arkhamverse, but it seems upon checking that afterwards that it will not be in that same universe, despite certain similarities that we had thought. But we will still probably talk about it a little bit because, it is very much linked to that sort of Batman games that have been coming out recently. With that being said, I want to start off talking very much about the story, and I think I want to talk a little bit first of all about the latter half of the story, because there's so much stuff to unpack even after you finish the main campaign. One inclusion I kind of want to mention, and this is very small in a sense, but I just thought it was a really nice sort of way to go about it, was that obviously once we learned that the Arkham Knight is Jason Todd, and he kind of bails on sort of his whole militia group or whatever, a new leader comes into the fold, and it's one Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke, which I think is such a nice a nice sort of character they put in, because I initially thought that first thing that was going to happen was it was just going to be some generic looking militia leader that was going to take over them after, or provide the voice lines for any of the side quests you do involving them. But it was kind of nice, I think, I suppose, to see a familiar face or familiar mask in this case, because I think the only time I think we see him in the Arkhamverse is in Origins. I'm not aware, I don't think he's in City, and he's certainly not in Asylum, but it was nice to kind of see him incorporated into this, even if it was just for a small role, which I think is good. I don't know, what do you think of the whole sort of incorporation? Do you think it fits well, first of all?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, he's a mercenary. He's like one of the legendary Batman villains, probably quite a few people's favorite at the minute, featuring in Zack Snyder's Justice League for just a minute or two.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the way he was introduced in Arkham Origins, although in the game he's slightly more underwhelming, the cinematic trailer that accompanied Origins really sold that fight between Batman and Deathstroke. So I think, he's fantastic. He's way more of like a competent villain than Arkham Knight, in my opinion. I'm just happy to see Deathstroke. I mean, I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, he's an interesting villain in my eyes, because I have whenever I think of Deathstroke or Slade Wilson, or as he's always called, I always think of Teen Titans, because he was like really much the main antagonist of those cartoons when I was growing up. So I always I don't know, for so long I always saw him as like a B-rated villain that kind of fought the sidekicks of every superhero. But it turns out, in comic book wise, I'm pretty sure like he's one of the more in-depth characters, and probably, as is mentioned in the game, one of Batman's probably more competent opponents, considering the sort of, I don't know, people when they talk about the Riddler, it's really weird the way it's kind of like the Riddler can be, I think for this new Batman movie that's coming out, the Riddler looks like he's actually someone to be feared, whereas in like every other iteration we've seen of the Riddler, he's kind of this, I don't know, wimpish guy that happens to have like some weird craze for riddles, which sometimes just aren't even riddles. But yeah, I think the good thing about the different mediums of Batman is that you will find pretty much a variation of every one of the villains in some form or another, whether they're wacky or they're really deep and serious. I think a great example of that is like Adam West's Batman is very much all wacky, goofy stuff, and then if you compare that to something like The Dark Knight, which is like the complete polar opposite in every way, or even something like Joker, like you can have such a change in it, that it's in that I find it so interesting. But I think I was mentioning this to you when I was playing the game. I think the story elements they've incorporated in this game are just done so perfectly. I don't think they've missed the ball on sort of, describing any character. Like, I think one of the characters I always think that gets really shafted when it comes to Batman stuff is Penguin. Penguin always gets like being like made the butt joke or whatever. But like, Penguin in this game is like by far like, he's by no means the greatest villain, but he's on par with like Two-Face as being, a competent villain for Batman to face. And there's some good depth to his character in that sense. So I think the Telltale game does Penguin justice a lot. Like, at least to my knowledge, I think I played 3 of the episodes out of that, and I like the way they've gone about it, and he seems fairly decent in that. But overall, I think all the villains are quite solid. I think they portray themselves quite well. I think obviously the Joker not being in this game, physically, I think he still plays an unreal role. And there's one point I want to talk about with you is the end sequence when you're getting the fear toxin and you're kind of put into the shoes of the Joker. I think that is one of the best segments of the game. I think it's just so well done. And the pure horror that comes out of it as well. Like, I know, just get your thoughts and opinions on that a little bit.
See, because I played this game years ago when I had a PlayStation 4. So everything was like slightly familiar, though through like kind of half remembered memories. So when I got to the bit where you're actually, when the fear toxin kind of takes over and you kind of have that inner battle with the Joker, I mean, first of all, you got the Joker Batmobile that comes out and you're actually shooting people. It's like, finally, we're killing people. That feels awesome. But actually, the scenes where you're playing as Joker in a third-person shooter or first-person shooter, what it really made me think of was, like, wow, because Rocksteady are currently making Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which they have said is taking place in the Arkhamverse. And the main premise of that game is that Brainiac has brainwashed the Justice League. So you've got the characters Harley Quinn, Captain Boomerang, King Shark, and Deadshot, who you are able to play as in a third-person shooter game. And basically, the boss fights will be members of the Justice League, such as Superman and the Arkham Batman. So what it really made me think of was that Rocksteady are maybe at the end of this game said, how cool would it be if we had Joker in a third person or a first person shooter mode? And then, what if, because they added that as like a fun little segment of the game, and then for their next game to like do a fully fledged third person shooting game where you're playing as DC characters, it almost feels like they were just following the fun. But it was probably one of the most successful segments in all the Arkham games, just because it was so fantastic. Because it's teased to us kind of playing as the Joker. That I think Arkham Origins has a section where you play as the Joker. Arkham Asylum, you can play as the Joker in a few of the challenges. But really, it's always that thing that you really want to do. And Arkham Asylum did it really well, actually, where all your tools are replaced by Joker things, so you can like throw bombs and shoot people. It's really fun. To have a little like mini game where you're walking around and there's like this kind of haunting psychological fight with Batman. I think it really it builds up to one of the kind of most hard-hitting, interesting Batman Joker interactions that I've ever seen. I thought it was wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's really good, and I think like it was genuinely the only part that I kind of got slightly scared at, because it was just like, well, first of all, it's good to note that I think that I am not the best when it comes to horror games. I absolutely despise them, not for the sense that I think they're poorly made. I get scared at every one of them. It could be the simplest horror game. It could be cubes on a screen and I would get scared at it. So to play through that sort of nightmare sequence where the statues are, kind of just appearing behind you. First of all, this is someone who grew up on like Doctor Who and like the Weeping Angels. So like this was like giving me shits like as soon as it happened. Although until you kind of realize that if you just back yourself into a wall, like I think you stole the gameplay. So I just kind of had to move out of that wall straight away. but yeah, I got such a big jump when because you're just going around shooting all the statues, and then one of them actually is him, and he just grabs you. So I was just like, yeah, no, I think I'd probably drop my controller at one stage, which is not good because I just got the Series 2 controller, so I don't want that to break. So outside of that, yeah, no, I think it's so good. I love as well at the end. It's kind of almost like, I don't know, it's kind of poetic in a sense that it makes sense that the Joker's one fear would be being forgotten. And I think it especially, not even in just Arkham games, but in like media in general, that is something the Joker is always trying to make these elaborate like ways of garnering people's attention or scaring people. And like the comics are all like very much that, like, you know, like that's kind of one of the core reasons behind why he doesn't kill Batman, is because Batman kind of keeps him relevant in a sense, because without that he hasn't got an equal really to kind of stop him in certain ways. And it's really, I think it's just so well done. Like, and then it's almost kind of, it's a self-healing method for Bruce Wayne as well, because he kind of like quite literally, like, it's kind of slapping you in the face, like if you weren't getting the metaphor behind it, but he quite literally puts Joker in a cell and throws him away to be forgotten in like the back of his mind, which I think is a really which is a really good end to that game as well. I do think it was absolutely I had the biggest smile on my face when Scarecrow first fear talks like gave him the fear toxin at the end. He was like, everyone's gonna know who you are, how do you feel? And he just starts laughing at him, and he's like, why aren't you scared? And I just think like it's just so funny for like because it says a lot about the character of Scarecrow as well, because it's very much just like Scarecrow's one thing. It's just based on the whole idea of somebody needs to be scared for order for his character to have any weight whatsoever, because if they're not, like, then he's pretty much useless because he can't fight. Like, and outside of his fear toxin, he's just useless. And so like it almost like makes him vulnerable in a sense. So in a way, actually, I suppose Scarecrow actually ends up curing the Batman, which is kind of strange, because first of all he brings on this sort of, because if he had just left him, I think, you know, Scarecrow probably would have just won. But the fact that he was so stubborn, and the fact that he really wanted to make him fearful, he ended up just driving the fear out of him. Which is interesting. And I know for a lot of people it's always like this, particularly in media, it's always like, oh, I hate how like overpowered this person is or this character is. I don't care. Like, Batman could, I don't know, reverse engineer a nuke or something, like without any prior training, and I'd be like, oh yeah, of course Batman can do that, he's Batman. Like, there doesn't have to be any explanation for why Batman does what he does. All I care is that, you know, particularly I don't know if you've seen any of the sort of more recent animated DC films. Yeah,
a few of them.
Yeah, but there's always like, I think there's always, if Batman is featured in one of them, there will always be at least one scene where Batman is being like the smartest person in the room, or like doing something that's just like, I don't know how to describe, like extremely Batman. Like, there's one thing where I always think of the one scene from, I think it's the first time the Justice League meet in that New 52 era sort of style film. I think they fight Darkseid in that film. I can't remember what the name of it. I think it's Justice League War, it might be. But there's one scene in which Batman meets Hal Jordan, who's obviously Green Lantern, and they're like just going through the sewers trying to find these parademons, and it's just like Hal Jordan's like, so what, like, oh, somebody didn't get their blood, and he's like, oh, I'm not a vampire. It's like, oh, well, you super strength, fly. And it's like, do you fly? It's like, yeah, in a plane. And it's just like, you're not just some guy in a suit. And he just like smiles at him, and then he's like, because then you kind of, in certain ways, it's like Batman's strength is like the fact that he's probably the peak non-superhuman. Like, he's obviously extremely strong, like he's extremely intelligent. Like, there's scenes, I think, where like even like just Batman just speaks such a wide range of languages for no apparent reason, and we never like, not that I'm asking for an episode in which we see Batman sit down and learn Russian, but like there's just like stuff that he just knows for no apparent reason. It just kind of suits the plot, and you can kind of just throw it in there, and it's just like, yeah, well, Batman would know this, wouldn't he? And I suppose games in a sense do that so much justice, because like you can just like throw Batman into any scenario, throw him at any villain, and it's just like, yeah, well, Batman will have no problem with this. Batman never has a problem with anything. Yeah, sorry, I don't know where I was going on that tangent. I think I was just gushing over Batman for a while, which I think is a fair point. I think for most people, he's probably, if not the favorite, like up there as one of the favorites. And he certainly, in terms of new media, he certainly carries a lot of weight in that sphere, especially in the superhero franchise. I don't know where this point began, but if you want to kind of keep us going, Connor, I'm perfectly fine with that.
It's weird, isn't it? He's supposed to be the ultimate detective, so it's always it's always satisfying when he's the one that outsmarts everyone, or he's 2 steps ahead. I don't know, I'm trying to think, like, there was another thing that I was kind of really interested with in Arkham Knight. I'm sure it'll come back to me later. But yeah, I think that bit with Scarecrow, because Scarecrow's toxin obviously kind of provokes the Joker manifestation within Batman. I don't know. It's always like, at the conclusion of any fight, Batman always has to be like, well, I knew that would happen. It's just like clear that obviously you didn't. Like, you could have lost everything. And like, my girlfriend was, because if you didn't listen to the last episode, my girlfriend began watching this and then like stopped me playing it because I had to play it with her so she could see the whole story. And she was like screaming the whole story, like, Batman killed Barbara. Like, she wouldn't forgive him at all. And like, for a large portion of the story, we do believe that Batman has like failed Barbara at least, and is also a dick to Robin. And just because at the end he can go, look, everything turned out all right, it's like, doesn't pardon him. I feel like in the previous games he is kind of that valiant hero, and by this one he's very tired and cynical and kind of almost grumpy old manish, like the I know best, and he's quite heavy-handed with the Bat family and doesn't want anyone else to be involved. It feels a very different Batman, although he's played kind of very, at least his animations throughout the game are very flat. And there's never a moment where he shows much emotion. He does seem very different, like almost tired or angry in this game as opposed to the other Arkham games.
Yeah. No, that kind of, I suppose, rings a lot of weight. Now, I can't really touch on that as much because I haven't an extensive knowledge of the previous games like you do. But one thing I kind of want to talk about, and this is kind of segueing onto a different point surrounding the narrative, was the handling of Jason Todd being the Arkham Knight and how he transitions then into the Red Hood. Because I actually, first of all, I thought to myself, well, I think I very early on realized it was just going to be Jason Todd, because it just seemed so obvious to anyone who had who knew anything about the sort of Batman, what would you call it, the lore? I don't know if you call it lore in that sense, but like anyone who had any knowledge of the sort of the Red Hood storyline could kind of see the parallels to Jason Todd, like the knowledge he has of Batman. You would kind of think, well, it has to be someone who's that close. But I think the only thing that kind of threw me off being so certain about it was the fact that I knew there was a Red Hood DLC, and I was like, wait, how's there a Red Hood DLC if he's Arkham Knight? But one thing I wasn't expecting was how well they would handle the transition from being Arkham Knight to Red Hood, and almost the change. I don't know why he decides to change his helmet and like all his clothes to red like midway through a scene, but I mean, it works in a sense, and I enjoy that. Like, I think it's interesting in that sense, and it's definitely a new interpretation on him becoming the Red Hood as opposed to him just being that straight after the whole bit where Joker supposedly kills him. So I enjoy that incorporation. Those elements of, well, like those sort of bits where you're what's the word I'm looking for, where the room kind of blacks out and you're kind of almost presented with this live flashback. So like the bit where Barbara gets shot, the various elements of Jason Todd being tortured and then subsequently killed, like they're so well done, and they're done in such a good way that like it's really dark and gritty, and sometimes, you know, there's some little goofy elements in this Arkham game that kind of make it feel a bit more fun, but those bits really drive it home as kind of this real dark, gritty, and it supplies some good history to the character as well. So like for me, who hasn't played the previous games, but even if you're just a mild Batman fan, you'll get some sort of fan service out of it, I suppose. There is also I think a really nice touch as well when you're going after sort of the what are they, pseudo jokers, I suppose you would call them. One of them is where I think in two of those sections there's Jason Todd flashbacks, and in one of them where Tim Drake comes up, Batman then accidentally calls him Jason. I think that I don't know, like, because obviously Batman doesn't talk a lot in this game, but I think it's such a good bit of character to add to him, because like it obviously says that, like, you know, you can tell by not even looking at him that he's spooked by this, like, because it obviously hits hard in that sense, because like he may not like physically register it, but in his head is probably going like, oh shit, like look what I did, like, and then you start to understand why he threw Tim Drake then into that cell at the end of all that interaction. So I think the writing is done really well in this, and I think at the end then it kind of again it kind of circles back again, and Batman becomes a bit more trusting of the Bat family, because he ends up then realizing that, you know, by trapping Tim in there, like, he has actually just handed him to Scarecrow, which was a really bad move. One thing I don't get is why Jim Gordon is somehow, like, when you go to the asylum to meet Scarecrow, why Jim Gordon is just not strapped down or tied down in any way, shape or form. He just seems to be walking around, and I think if you're just stuck in a room with Scarecrow, like, I mean, Jim Gordon obviously isn't in peak condition, but I reckon he could take him, to be honest. Like, if he just found a gun or took it off him, like, I just feel like he could do it, or even he could just slyly untie Tim Drake. That's one thing I kind of didn't get. Sorry, I'm just throwing stuff out here at the moment, but I want to mention one other thing. I really like this is an element of good writing. I really enjoyed the part where early on, as I mentioned in the previous episode, the Arkham Knight makes it very clear to the kind of the crew around him, but also in a sense the player, that the center of the Batman symbol is not a good place to shoot. And then at the end, Jim shoots him in that symbol to try and make it look like he's killed him. I think that's just some really good foreshadowing, in a sense, that the game has put forward, like, because you as the player know straight away Batman's not dead, like, not that you would think that anyways at the end of that game. Even if they did shoot him in like the head, I'd still be like, oh yeah, he's probably just gonna come back. But no, I just want to say I thought that was really good. Sorry, you had a point you want to jump in on, Connor. I'm kind of hogging the mic here.
I mean, yeah, I'm sort of blown back by your assessment of Gordon not being tied down, because then there's all sorts of questions like, does Scarecrow have any thugs left? Who was driving the truck? I don't know. Like, on a certain level, it works. Yet, if you actually saw the thugs there, it'd be like, well, Batman would be unable to touch Scarecrow and overwhelm him. Although you could say that maybe the Red Hood took them out. I mean, I don't know. There's a little bit of storytelling artifice there where things have to happen. And, you know, it's present in every story. There's always a what if the Death Star wasn't had this huge exploit, or what if, you know, what if that never happened, and it's like the roll credits meme. You know, I don't think there's anything around that really. But I will say that as soon as Barbara died, supposedly, see, in my head, I feel like it's a failure of me being so hyped about Gotham Knights, because I was going, well, Batgirl's in Gotham Knights, so Barbara can't die in this one. So I was turning to my girlfriend and saying, no, Barbara's not dead, she's got to be in the next game. Obviously before realizing that it takes place in a different continuity. Although it is confusing for consumers when the same studio who made Arkham Origins is making something with basically the skin of the Arkham games, but set in a different continuity.
Yeah.
You know, that's slightly confusing to me, but, you know, maybe a moot point. So Barbara's death didn't really I don't feel it had the weight for me. Obviously, had my girlfriend saying Batman was awful and let Barbara die the whole game. I actually found Poison Ivy's death to be really quite impactful because she gave her life saving Gotham, and it hit hard because there's no way she could have faked that death. It was like a really noble final act, and that death really, really worked for me. The revealing of Arkham Knight, it becomes obvious once you have kind of flashbacks dangled in front of you, because it's unfair to reveal the Arkham Knight's identity, and it's someone the player's never heard of. So that the possibilities have to be presented to the player. I mean, that's kind of the fundamentals of a basic mystery. It's done fine. It's done well. The main point is the Arkham Knight is a formidable enemy who turns out to have an emotional vendetta, and you get to experience the history. And I do love the flashbacks to the Killing Joke and A Death in the Family. I think they're brilliant. I really enjoy when it references the comics, and I'll probably really enjoy Gotham Knights because I know that they incorporate the Court of Owls comic storyline. So that'll be really, really fun. The Joker point, I think a lot of people have probably criticized how Joker manifests in this game, because obviously he dies in Arkham City, so he can't be full Joker. So what you're expecting in this game is possibly a game where you're facing Scarecrow the whole of it, and in reality it's like you're facing Scarecrow, but you have to deal with Joker all along the way, and you can't win until you overcome that Joker. I will say that the most fun I had in this game were probably retrieving the patients infected with Joker blood from Harley's goons. I think working together with Robin, and again it's on foot, there's no Batmobile, and you're getting to experience the different kind of personalities of the Joker. You kind of got the big brawler one who is reminiscent of Joker's Titan form in Arkham Asylum. You've kind of got the smart, crazy woman Joker who slightly resembles Harley. You've kind of got the comedian singer in Johnny Charisma. And then obviously you've got Henry Adams, who's kind of the normal, able to reason and fake being unaffected, like the normal side of Joker. And then obviously the vigilante and Batman. Maybe I'm reading too much into it and saying that they're all a different part of the Joker's personality, but I really enjoyed those different interactions. Again, if this game was full of kind of those very kind of tight areas where you're doing kind of those stealth missions and you're working with, say, a Robin type character, and you've kind of got those interesting interactions that like you have with Harley. If the whole game was full of that, because that's what I loved in Arkham Asylum, and I think that's what probably works best. Those are the bits I love most, and I found those fantastic. I think overall the way the Joker appears in this game as a sort of Tyler Durden, Johnny Silverhand, it's a very common, recognizable and familiar trope now to have someone living in the protagonist's head. I think it's fun. It works. We get to have kind of more the personality of the Joker come out and have really interesting conversations with him all the time. Like, it's always fun to hear his commentary on whatever's happening, because the whole fun of like Batman and the Joker, I realize I'm repeating the word fun too much, I'll try and stop, is that the Batman is a very serious, very dark character, and the Joker's a very light, very crazy character. So you have that kind of antithesis in the relationship, and that's why they work together so well. So to have the main character have kind of this personality living in his head, it's just so like fantastic writing that the whole way through you're constantly getting the commentary from possibly everyone's favorite or favored Batman character, because everyone loves the Joker. You know, it works brilliantly. And again, we have that kind of nightmare visions that Snyder liked to use in Batman vs Superman and Justice League, where you kind of get visions of what's going to happen if certain things don't work out, and like a vision of a Joker Batman released on the city, causing absolute mayhem, which I think worked really well. And it works extremely well just before you lock Tim up, when you see the whole vision play out with Jason, because then you understand Batman's motivations. And there's not really ever a point where you get to choose Batman's choice in this game. Like, you make the decision for him. It's a very tailored story, so it always has to be what Batman would do in that situation. So it's not Batman Telltale. And possibly the one moment where we do get to choose in the Arkham series is where you're playing as Catwoman in Arkham City, and you can either save Batman or leave the city with the jewels. And if you leave the city, then the credits roll and then it rewinds, and then you actually do go save Batman. So it's like Rocksteady always putting the thing as like, no, the characters will do what they want to do, but we'll just put the controller in your hands and make you do it. And I think that's, again, as I said before, like, the best thing about these games is that it doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't like bring up a button prompt most of the time. The thing that you were talking about, I think last episode, with the Arkham Knight dropping in with all those thugs and saying the weak points on the suit, I was kind of waiting for a prompt to come up for me to take on those thugs, and then it's like, no, I have to work this out for myself. I have to go to the Batmobile remote and take them out. And it's like, there are multiple times in this game where nothing will happen unless you work it out for yourself and do the correct thing. So it does make you feel intelligent. It makes you feel like the strategist that Batman is. That was the original point that I was going to make, is the ultimate detective and the ultimate strategist. So when you're put into Batman's shoes, you don't want to just feel like you're playing a Sherlock Holmes game where you're going through the motions, but actually Sherlock knows everything before you've worked it out. It's that feeling of, it's in your hands. All the tools available to you are given to you, and you're given a sandbox in which to use them, and how you use them, and whether you can work it out is just constantly rewarding. I can't like speak highly enough, really.
Yeah, no, it's really well done. Yeah, sorry, I'm kind of stumped of where to kind of go with this, because I genuinely, I think if I was to say, like, because I really want to touch on the villains for this, because I think it's one of the main selling points of any of the Batman games, is the characters and the roster of characters that are presented, because it's one of those few things where they don't try and reinvent the wheel, and they kind of go off the premise that, yes, people know who these characters are, so they'll just kind of develop based on that, which is good, because I don't think anyone wants I mean, the one thing I will say, I think that the death of Martha and Thomas Wayne, I think, is brought up way too much in Arkham games. I think it's present in, I know for a fact it's present in Asylum and in Knight. I'm not sure. It most definitely has to be present in Origins. Like that was the main reason for it. Like,
I believe it's present in all 4 games. A replaying of that scene.
Yeah, no, it's almost like a joke at this point, because the amount of times we've seen Batman's parents' death in movie format as well is just actually ridiculous. Like, I think we have their death from, obviously, Snyder's I think it's Justice League it's in the intro.
At least I know it's in the
it's in Batman v
Superman. Yeah.
It's also in, like, obviously Batman Begins, it's in Michael Keaton's Batman, all the rest of them, and then for some reason it's even in Joker, which, like, makes so little sense. It's just so random that it happens to be there. It's almost like they kind of just had to throw that scene in there. But I think story wise and character wise, it's one of those games that you can have a large assortment of characters and it doesn't feel oversaturated, or it doesn't feel like there's too many people in it. I think all the characters kind of, their motivations, and partly I think that's down to the player's previous knowledge of the media. With regards to Batman, because people know the core story behind Batman. They know he's kind of this dark brooding type that he doesn't kill, he wants to keep Gotham safe in different bits, and you can kind of work your way from there. People kind of know the similar story of, say, like the multiple Robins at this stage. I mean, maybe that's a little bit more niche, but people know that Nightwing, without having to be told, is he's a previous Robin, he's the first Robin, Dick Grayson. His parents died when they were doing trapeze or whatever. Like, people know that, so it doesn't linger on these elements that most people already know, and it allows these characters sort of almost flourish and become their own thing, and transpire into something that maybe people aren't expecting. Now, the one thing I will say is, as much as I love them referencing the comics, I feel like it makes these games a little bit too predictable at stages. Like, obviously, as I mentioned, the bit about the Arkham Knight, yes, it's a little bit of a change from, say, it just being directly the Red Hood, but there wasn't a point where I was like, oh my god, I wonder who the Arkham Knight is. Like, I always knew it was Jason Todd from the beginning. Like, I couldn't not think it was him. I do like, the one thing about these Arkham games is that it gives a lot of it shines a lot of light on characters that are less well explored in, say, like movies, with regards to Batman. Now, obviously, they're always explored in TV, because there's so many episodes of like animated Batman series at this stage that I think every person has gotten at least one point. A special shout out, I think, to Dr. Langstrom, who's also the Man-Bat, who is a character that I did not expect to see at all in any other form of Batman medium, since the cartoons I saw when I was a kid. I think he's like the first Batman villain I was ever introduced to. Again, I'm a huge fan of Mr. Freeze as well. I think he works really well in all forms of Batman media. I think, now, I don't know exactly, but I've heard a lot of people say that he's one of the strongest characters in the Arkhamverse, with regards to background and story. But the whole thing, excluding the Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonation of Mr. Freeze in those old like Tim Burton movies, Mr. Freeze is kind of one of the more tragic characters in the Batman universe, given that he has his wife frozen, and he's not necessarily a bad person, he just does bad things. I really like the complexity as character. I think probably a little bit more so than, say, someone like Penguin or Two-Face. Like, I can sympathize with Two-Face, and actually, in fairness, I do really like the iteration of Two-Face in Nolan's trilogy. I think he's done really well in The Dark Knight, and I think it's good that he doesn't linger into The Dark Knight Rises. Granted, I don't really like the Nolan universe's iteration of Bane. I kind of like Bane being this sort of hulking, like, sumo wrestler, not sumo wrestler, just a wrestler from like Mexico who just is like completely like off the wall and like cartoonish in a sense. I think that's what Bane is good at. But that's so difficult, obviously, to display on screen, because I don't think that's ever a good thing. I think the closest we've ever gotten to one of those weird sort of wacky characters from comic books being displayed on screen is like Juggernaut in Deadpool 2, who is so comic book accurate that it just looks so strange and jarring to see this. Like, because on comic books, or even in cartoons, like, it doesn't look out of the ordinary to have like this super huge human with like biceps the size of like 2 or 3 people. But like, when you see it in live form, it looks disgusting, and you're just like, get this off my screen. I think a perfectly good example of this is like in Into the Spider-Verse. There's obviously the way in which Kingpin, or what's his name? Oh God, it's gonna escape my head now. But Kingpin or whatever, he's just pretty much drawn as this huge square, like, which is to signify his body type. But like, I think there's a very good iteration of him in, I don't know if you've seen the Marvel Daredevil series on Netflix.
No, not fully.
No, but he's very well done in the 3rd season of that. So there's good, but the adaptation, obviously, the visual look has to be very different. And now he's still a big guy, but like, he's believably big, as opposed to this sort of over exaggerated comic book style. But yeah, no, bringing it back a bit back to the Arkhamverse, I think the one thing this game has done well is not treating the treating the characters and the sort of the founding story with with good respect. I don't think they've tried to, you know, step on the toes of anything. Like one of the big contentious things of Snyder's iteration of Batman was that he kills in certain elements, and you could probably be like, yeah, maybe you could see the point of, like, you know, Jason Todd's dead or whatever, and he'd been killed by the Joker. Maybe that would push him over the line, if not only for the fact that, you know, that idea of Batman has been fleshed out in comics, and it's explained quite well and reasonably as to why he wouldn't. Like, if that was the case, you know, you'd think he'd want vengeance after the death of his parents. So, like, it seems like a kind of a cop-out statement in that sense. But I really like the way they handle each character in this. There's not one character in this that I don't feel is faithful to the adaptation that they're coming from. Like, I think every character feels believable, feels like a Batman character. I don't know, do you have a particular favorite character from this game?
Oh, wow. I find that to be a really hard question. Do you have a favorite character?
Let me think. Do I have a favorite character? It's a tough one. I'm trying to think now, because there's bits I like about all of them. I think maybe I do quite like the Arkham Knight in this. Just from a personal story wise, I don't think he's my favorite. I think if I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be, yeah, it's probably Scarecrow, to be honest. I don't know. I think Scarecrow's done quite well in this. I know there's a lot of people, like, as you mentioned in the last game, there's a huge difference between Scarecrow in previous titles as opposed to this. But I kind of like the more realistic version of Scarecrow. I think he's still, like, I think the Scarecrow design is the best we've ever seen portrayed. I don't think there's a better iteration of what Scarecrow would look like. Because he does look visually horrifying. The one thing I never got about, like, the Nolan trilogy's Scarecrow is he just puts a bag on his head and he's automatically like this scary monster. Like, you know, this one actually looks sort of like creepy in a sense. Like, but yeah, no, I probably Scarecrow. I think it's difficult to play a Batman game and not think Batman's your favorite character, though, at the same time.
The thing is, where we're at in the narrative, I probably find Harley Quinn the most interesting, and that's probably lingering off the back of the Arkham City DLC. I think Harley Quinn's Revenge, where you've got a grieving Harley after the death of Joker, and she becomes sort of brutal and a force onto her own. And I don't feel she's done very well in this game. I mean, in the Arkham game, she's always dispatched very quickly with a counter by Batman, and she's just thrown to the floor always. And then, you know, she does a thing where she just kind of punches him very kind of lightly in the back when he's carrying her. And she's not done particularly well because she's not very intelligent. But to see after Joker's death her become this kind of like this angry, dark, kind of vengeful Harley. She appeared quite deadly, and, you know, I really liked the kind of running black makeup and the kind of black that she wore with the red, kind of going back to her original character design. So, I mean, I would have loved to have seen more Harley, but, you know, I agree. Scarecrow's done fantastically in this game. I think most of my knowledge of the Batman characters came from the Arkham games. And what I was going to say is, playing the first one, Arkham Asylum, they don't use all the characters, but what they do is that when the Riddler gives you riddles to solve, they'll each be in their own environment. So there'll be like something hidden from, like, there'll be Firefly's flamethrower or like a Harvey Dent election poster, and you scan it to solve the riddle. And it will give you the codex entry for that character. So it will give you a codex entry of Two-Face and of Firefly. And that was fantastic for me because you only get exposed to kind of the main villains who kind of have an arc throughout the Asylum story. But then if you want to know their background, you go into the codex, you read a whole description of who they are. You've got the fact file about them. You've kind of got interview tapes with them from their sessions with psychiatrists at Arkham. So it was always fantastic, and all the character designs in Arkham Asylum were heavily inspired by the comic versions of the characters. So they all had, the colors. Bane was huge, and they all looked how you'd expect them to look coming straight from the comics. Obviously, Batman had his fabric suit, which was never very practical against bullets or anything like that. And by the end of Asylum and City, all that suit is shredded, and his cape has, the wear and tear from a whole campaign's worth. In Origins, I think Warner Bros. Montreal went for a very cinematic, it feels probably the closest to kind of Nolan, well, maybe the closest along with Arkham Knight to kind of the Nolan films, and the fact that you've got the armor plated kind of metal bat suit. You've got Bane looking, we actually see Bane transform in that game from the quite realistic looking wrestler to using the kind of venom to bulk himself out and become the huge hulk of a man that he does. So Origins and Knight really go kind of full into that cinematic look, whereas the previous games remained very kind of comic inspired. So that really plays into well with kind of the Scarecrow's narrative in this being they've done really well with narrative, because in Asylum it's obviously with a first game whether you're looking at what I assume Yakuza 1 would be or Halo Combat Evolved, it's very kind of bare bones narrative introducing you to the gameplay. And what they've done with kind of narrative over these games is they've always been expanding upon their own lore and writing kind of overarching stories, to actually where Arkham Knight, due to my girlfriend saying, you can't play this unless I'm watching you, it becomes very much like a Batman film. So you've got to praise it for kind of having that atmosphere. And, not to linger on a point too much, but as I say, it is just a shame that between those kind of really good cinematic sections, there are just kind of mindless gunning down of drones. But
yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. One point I want to make on the whole, because when you were talking about Harley Quinn, one scene that just kind of flashed into my mind that made me laugh when I saw it was when you've defeated, I think, it's when you've defeated the three Joker, pseudo Jokers or whatever, and you're going back, and there's all these guards kind of in the middle gate, and you have to use the voice thing to open the gate, and Harley comes out before you can actually do it. It's like, no, it's not me, you idiot or whatever. And it's such a ballsy, but first of all, she comes out with this huge machine gun, and such a ballsy move then by Tim Drake to then just walk in front of these bars. He could easily be shot. I just thought it was so funny. It was just because he was quite literally going up and very much intentionally antagonizing her and being like, oh yeah, no, he doesn't think you're worth it, he sent me here. And it's just I don't know why Harley Quinn then automatically goes, open the gate so I can shoot him. It's yes, there's bars there, it's not like a wall, you could just shoot him. Yeah.
It's always the trouble with Bond villains, isn't it? They just can't stop themselves from monologuing.
Oh yeah, no, it does. I see. That's the one thing I don't get, because obviously it's a very in tone wise, it's a dark game, and it takes itself quite seriously. But then there's elements like that where you're kind of thinking, well, is this on purpose, or is this just I don't know, have they kind of just not really looked at logic there and being well, Harley Quinn would just shoot him. It's just I don't know, maybe I'm thinking way too much into it, but there does seem to be, and we mentioned this in the last episode, there's such weird little narrative elements that, if I can think of a reason of why this shouldn't be, surely these people who claim to be experts of combating Batman should know the exact same thing. As we mentioned, the tanks being drones and not manned by people, why wouldn't they just put people in them so Batman couldn't shoot them, or he'd have to do something else about it?
Yeah, again, I don't know. To a certain extent, if you always had characters that learn from their past mistakes and constantly getting more intelligent, you wouldn't have a game left at the end of the day, because they would just be brutal. I mean, imagine Riddler if he could kill Batman or Catwoman without making Batman do all the riddles. It would just be like so overpowered. It'd just be like, oh, I killed Batman, or I killed Catwoman, and well, I knew you wouldn't solve my riddles, so there you go, game over.
Oh yeah, the one thing I hated, and I don't think this is something I'm ever going to finish, is the fact that in order to fight Riddler, you have to collect all his trophies, and I have no intention of ever doing that. So he could just stay in that little basement he goes to.
It's always the most tedious. I loved coming across the riddles and trophies in Arkham Asylum, although I have to say it did become a little bit of a chore when you're kind of, every time you walk into a new room, you kind of enter all the vents to try and find a trophy. I mean, that gets a bit boring. I thought it was implemented well in City because it didn't feel like there were an endless amount, and every Riddler thug that you interrogated gave you more locations of the Riddler trophies. I felt that was manageable.
Yeah.
But still, through my playthrough of City, there was no point where I felt compelled to do that. In my playthrough of Origins, there were like network relays that were on the map. All you had to do is go to them, throw a batarang at them, and destroy them. And then once you got all of them, you could shut down something of Riddler's. But then to fully face and defeat the Riddler, you had to collect all his trophies. And it was just like, well, I'll go to all the different places and shoot a batarang, but I'm not collecting those trophies. Like I find them fun coming along them like on a rooftop and going, oh yeah, I can solve this one. But like going through, like putting the waypoint down on the map and going through all of them is like, no, I can't be bothered.
Yeah, no, I think when you mentioned the bits about the Riddler stuff in Arkham City, obviously there's elements in which you can track down people on the streets and interrogate them to find out locations. I think this must have been a glitch in my game, but when in the GCPD, I think it just randomly picks one of the AIs to be covered in green as to interrogate. And for me, it made that one of the police officers. So he had like this weird green hair, but he was still in his police uniform, and he had like this big green outline. And then I just went up and he talks like a normal NPC. So he's not a Riddler like thing or anything. There's
he is.
Oh, he is. Is that a
story? If you press Y on him, you hold him against the bars and say, you work for Riddler. And the other cops draw their guns on you, and everyone says, oh, Batman's gone crazy. You're like, you guys, I don't work for Riddler. Batman's gone crazy. And you think for a certain moment, because you've got Joker inside of him, like, what if you are going crazy and you're just seeing this green outline? And then he finally gives you the details, and then you lock him in a cell.
Okay. I'm happy to know that that's the actual thing and it wasn't just a glitch with my game. Yeah, you could have said that a little bit earlier before I embarrassed myself, Connor, but thanks for letting me draw that out. That makes a lot more sense.
Well, it's a true experience from someone playing the game. I will say a glitch I forgot to mention earlier is that, when you're seen by all the thugs in a stealth area and you dive off the roof and you grapple around and you walk around the building and then return to them. Mm-hmm. I had detective mode on. Oh, it might have made sense if one of them was scanning me, but I didn't think of this at the time. But I ran off the building, I grappled to the plane, I kind of ran around all the buildings, and I had my detective mode on, so I could see that 3 of them were in different locations, and they all trained their gun on me and turned and followed me the whole way around, despite there being like obvious walls and buildings in the way. And I was like, I don't know. I thought it was a glitch at the time, but it might explain it if there was some of the scanner. But I'm pretty sure I'd be out of range. So that was like a really weird thing.
Yeah. There's some weird little bugs here and there that kind of present themselves. One task I will say that was really tedious was tracking down the Man-Bat. It's because you can find him pretty easily, but it's trying to align yourself to dive towards him. That's the annoying bit. Because there's so many times where I would just go by him or like over him, and it's like, I can see you, like, please, Langstrom, just like come down. Like, it's just, yeah. I
had that problem when because there's loads of cars like driving around, and they're all like, if not all, most of them are like criminals, and you can land on the top of them and like pull the driver out or whatever. And that was like one of my favorite things, but it's really hard to do, like, because they're all driving way faster. You can glide unless you like grapple and dive to get the boost or whatever. And constantly I was just diving and missing cars. I was just like, I really just want to jump on top of cars like Christian Bale. Just let me be Christian Bale. In fact, that brings me on to like a really interesting point about the DLC for this game, because the amount of Batman skins you get is like phenomenal. Because there are some in Arkham City. I don't think you can buy DLC for Arkham Origins anymore because it relies on the old Xbox store. So I wasn't able to buy any of that. But Arkham City, I got the skins with the remaster pack, so I could play as Earth 1 Batman, who I'd read in the comics. And in this one, I think my favorite to go to was the Christian Bale 2008 Batman from the Dark Knight trilogy. And I loved doing that, even though my girlfriend hated it. I loved that the Tumblr, you got all the different Batmobiles, so you can have the Batmobile from the Nolan trilogy, which is my absolute favorite. Although you only get it in the campaign once you've completed it, and you can't use the weapons with any Batmobile that isn't the shape of the standard one.
Oh.
So, but like the fact that you can choose like different skins for Robin and Catwoman and Batman, like I loved it, because I I hated the standard Robin design as well, where he's bald. It's like, that's not my Robin. I'll choose the new 52 Robin.
I can't tell. Did they model that Robin off the sort of the George Clooney sort of Robin?
I have no idea,
because it looks quite similar.
I haven't seen. What are you talking about? The bald one or the new 52 one?
The bald one from like the old movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jim Carrey and.
Well, I've never seen that.
Oh, look at you!
That Jim Carrey, Arnold Schwarzenegger, because I've heard so many bad things. It's just like, you know what? I'm just gonna watch.
They're worth the watch. In fairness, Connor, they're just for the fun of it. Like,
I'm just gonna watch this 1989 Batman film with Jack Nicholson as the Joker, and the rest can go burn in film history as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that is of course the famous Batman film that introduced the bat nipples on the bat suit, which is I don't know. Do you know about this? Is this just completely new to you? Yeah, no. There's the ones they used for those films were, I think they molded the sort of the Batman suit off like Greek architecture, so it's like it's got like these bat abs, and then like the chest elements have little nipples, which is really weird. Like, it just looks so strange and out of place, but it's quite a fun view. Like, those are the films I kind of grew up with. I thought they were so funny. I loved them at the time, and I think they're funny now, so maybe they've done their job.
I love that the Michael Keaton bat suit has like the head connected to the neck, so he can't move his head at all. He has to like move his whole body to look.
Yeah, not to mention that's a good one to bring up for like Batman Doesn't Kill, because Michael Keaton's Batman throws someone into like an incinerator or something. So like it's just like, they're always like kind of fun movies, those ones. I think up until the Nolan films, the Batman films were always kind of goofy in a sense. So that was like the first time we kind of saw a very serious Batman.
I just realized we haven't talked about the Nightfall ending.
The Nightfall.
Have you seen the Nightfall ending? If you do all the side missions and lock everyone away, you get the Nightfall protocol.
Okay, I haven't finished all the side quests, but you can spoil it away. I'm interested to hear this.
Okay, so once you put everyone away and Alfred says, okay, Gotham is safe, what happens is you go back to Wayne Manor and all the press are outside with Vicky Vale and they're recording you going back into the mansion. And Alfred asks, are you sure? And Bruce says, yes, we have to do this to protect them. So he closes the door, and then Wayne Manor literally blows up from the inside, and everyone assumes that someone has killed the Batman. So that's why Gordon starts the game by saying this is the story of how the Batman died. Ah,
okay.
So Wayne Manor like explodes, goes on fire, collapses in on itself, and everyone assumes that Bruce is dead and Batman is dead. Which I believe, so the DLC takes place after that, where Robin and stuff continue fighting crime. And then at the very end scene of the game, because Batman's going on about how Batman needs to be put to rest and something worse in his place needs to come out of the ashes and make the criminals afraid again. And at the very end of the game, you see a couple walking with their son, and it's like a replaying of the Thomas and Martha death scene, except the criminals turn halfway through robbing them, and they see like a bat-shaped vigilante figure standing on a rooftop. And they say, "Oh, haven't you heard the Batman's dead? What are you doing, you fool?" They didn't say it in quite such an English accent, by the way. I'm just I'm just dubbing. It's a really bad dub. And then basically, the vigilante figure opens his like bat wings, and like it's got that kind of fiery nightmare bat aesthetic from like when Scarecrow saw the Batman after being injected with his own toxin.
Mm-hmm.
And then it like kind of swoops down, like this creature like swoops down with all like the flames and everything. And so like there are multiple interpretations, and like one of them is that Bruce is still fighting crime but deploying like the fear toxin, or maybe like the criminals that after like long-term exposure to Scarecrow's toxin are still kind of getting fear visions of a bat figure chasing them. But it's a kind of ambiguous end that I really recommend you watch, actually, if you haven't seen it. But that's why I thought it would lead into Gotham Knights, because the premise of Batman dying at the end of this game, and then the next game with the Bat family taking his place, it felt so kind of lead on from it. But maybe it is a lead on in premise and concept, but not in continuity, because obviously we know that Rocksteady's Suicide Squad is going to use the Arkham Batman, and that likely we will be like Harley Quinn or Deadshot fighting a Brainiac brainwashed Batman at some point in that game. So I mean, it's all very interesting stuff, and of course I have to speak as to the ambiguous ending myself, but generally people have a few theories on it, whether it's like someone taking the place of Batman and using the Scarecrow fear toxin. It's a good ending. It's just like it's assumed the Batman is gone, but criminals are still cowering in fear after the legend of the Batman. So yeah, it's a good ending.
Yeah, makes sense anyways, and I'd be certainly intrigued to it. It's kind of making me want to go back and finish it now. Not that I wasn't going to, it's just that so much time it takes to put into that game. I think it's probably a good point to end on then, because we're at the hour mark now. I think we covered quite a good few bits as well, but there's so much more, as always, you can kind of talk about when it comes to something as long-standing as, say, Batman. And I think some of our videos on like Halo and Star Wars are a testament to that idea as well. But with that being said, finish off again. I will promote, which only seems like an hour ago for us, but will be a couple of days for you. I will promote the Discord server again, which will be the top link in the description. All our social media channels down there as well, if you want to go and follow us on them and keep up to date with everything we're doing. But until that, we will see you next week, where we will be discussing Donut County, which is a very much stark difference to the game we were discussing this week. So we will see you all then.